Call to order a regular meeting for the Normal Town Council for September 4th, 2018. Please call the roll.
Mayor Coos.
Here.
Mr. Fritzen.
Here.
Mr. McBride.
Here.
Mrs. Cummings. Mrs. Lorenz.
Here.
Mr. Preston.
Here.
Mr. McCarthy.
Here.
We'll begin with a pledge of allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, we've had no request for public comment, so we'll just move to the omnibus agenda. Items that will be considered with one vote unless a council member would like to pull an item for discussion. I would like to be excused from voting on any bills I may have incurred in my duties as mayor.
I would like to also be excused from a bill that I incurred as council member.
Mr. Fritzen?
Same thing here, asked to be excused from voting on bills incurred on my behalf.
I would also like to be excused from voting on any bills that,
We're a spending council here tonight, aren't we?
Really?
Move approval.
Second.
Items for consideration or approval of the minutes of the budget work session meeting of January 18, 2018. Approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of August 20th, 2018. Approval of Town of Normal expenditures for payment as of August 29th, 2018. And a resolution to award the bid for water treatment plant clarifier number 2 recoating project to RP Coatings Incorporated at a total cost of $447,860. Please call the roll.
Mr. Fritzen.
Aye.
Mr. McBride.
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz.
Aye.
Mr. Preston.
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy.
Aye.
Mayor Coos.
Aye. We have 2 items of general orders tonight. The first is a presentation by Jamie Wilkie, partner at Lauterbach and Amann CPA firm, on the town's annual financial statements and audit reports. Jamie, welcome.
Evening. We appreciate the opportunity to come out this evening. The goal of tonight's presentation is, in fact, to present the comprehensive annual financial report for the town of Normal for our most recent completed fiscal year end. I do want to point out just a couple of key highlights throughout the document and talk briefly about the audit process itself. First of all, I have to thank Andrew, and I know there's some finance department team members sitting out in the audience this evening. I cannot stress enough for the size of this community, the highest level of preparedness that the finance department undertakes as we come in to do our testing. We somewhat joke in our office that we'd like to use them as a model for some of our other clients who maybe aren't as well prepared when we come in. So we certainly do appreciate their efforts. With that being said, it was an outstanding audit process, resulting in what we call an unmodified or clean audit opinion, meaning the financial statements as presented are materially correct. The second component of our audit process is to assess the internal control environment. So can we rely upon those policies and procedures that have been put into place to ensure that the financial statements as presented to us by staff are in fact materially correct? I'm happy to report this evening that we had no issues with regards to internal controls or any testing through that process. So again, I just wanted to thank the finance department staff for all of their efforts in ensuring all of those I's are dotted and T's are crossed, and absolutely a very clean audit process. I do also want to point out that the town received what we call the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting. That is, in fact, for last year's audited financial statements. You'll find a copy of the award presented in the introductory section of the document. This is, just as a reminder, an independent third-party review of the financial statements and is really the highest level reporting we have for government entities. So a lot of information does get compiled as part of that submission process. And I would encourage you, if you have some time, the most important piece of that award process is what we call the statistical section. It is, in fact, the last tab of your comprehensive annual financial report and is where you will find all kinds of 10-year trend information for the town of Normal. So I always think from council member perspective, it's a great resource to find some of that historical data. The other section I want to point out is what we call management's discussion and analysis. That is towards the front of the large document. You'll find 12 pages provided within this section of the report, indicated by MD&A 1 through 12 at the bottom of the page numbers. This is intended to be the executive summary to the report. I know it is a very large document. As GASB continues, it seems to just be getting larger. So I would encourage council to read those 12 pages in detail. I think the staff did an excellent job of highlighting some of those key transactions and trends for the year. And hopefully you can walk away having kind of a nice comprehensive knowledge of what transpired throughout the year. I really had no other comments with regards to the audit process or the large report. I did want to point out we had one new management letter recommendation, that with regards to a fund that has just dipped below the recommended minimum target. Clearly, staff will be working to address that issue going forward. And our two prior recommendations were both fully implemented this year, so we're always like to see that prior recommendations are in fact being thought through by the staff and implemented. So overall, a very clean audit process, and I would be certainly happy to address any specific questions you might have.
Do we have any questions? No, I guess
We
not.
appreciate the opportunity this evening, and thank you again.
And thank you.
Thank you.
Item 8 is a resolution to accept the audited Town of Normal financial statements and report on internal controls from the town's auditors, Lauterbach and Amann CPA firm for the year ending March 31st,
Move
2018.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye. Mr.
Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The resolution is approved. 2 items of new business tonight. The first is a presentation of the fiscal year 2017-2018 financial trend and condition report.
Oh, we're reporting it.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Before I get into this report, I do want to just make a quick comment and show some appreciation for staff and finance. We had a long-term employee retire, Mike Steele, who many of you knew very well, a finance manager for the department for many years and did an outstanding job in his tenure here, running the audit, running the general ledger, all the cash and investments and the debt, and did a great job. Sue Wong was an accountant for us and took over from Mike last year and took over the audit process. And she has taken it and made it her own and done a fantastic job. So I do want to thank her and let you know that she's doing an outstanding job for the audit and for the general accounts and as a finance manager for the town. So she's in the audience there too. Thanks.
Thanks, Sue.
Moving on to the trend report. This is, of course, our annual discussion, and we in finance really enjoy bringing this to you every year. It gives us an opportunity to kind of share where things are at. It's a good preamble for the budget process coming up, and it gives us an opportunity to talk about numbers, which is always fun for me. Of course, this is very similar to prior years. We have 34 indicators that we review. We rate them as positive, as negative, or unclassified. We have been rating some as positive with caution, and we have added a new index this year, negative but optimistic, to give us a little more room to parse that down a bit. You can see that we look at 6 different categories, from community to expenditures to financial strategies. And it's really a pretty comprehensive report that we're proud to present every year, and it gives us a chance to kind of look at numbers, as I said, as we approach the budget year and as we ended last year. In terms of changes from the 16-17 report to the current 17-18, the year which is closed, you can see pretty stable. We had about 4 or 5 indicators switch between positive and negative. When the dust finally settled, we were 1 up in positive and 1 less in negative, which is good to see, but I would typically say it's a fairly regular year. And also, I might say this in the past, but these are just simply, finance's best interpretation with City Manager Reese giving her comments and thoughts. And it's really just about a dialogue in the end. If you don't agree with positive with caution or positive or negative but optimistic, it's really just a starting point for the discussion. The important thing is we just have this every year, which is more meaningful. There's 34 indicators. I'm going to just run through a handful of ones versus the entire report, but we can certainly dive into any one if you like in more detail. I'll try to remain somewhat efficient in my comments, but some will have to stop for a bit and do some explaining in terms of what's going on and what you're seeing for some more interpretation and context. This first one is one of the more straightforward ones, thankfully. Assessed value for the town, we did see an increase this year for 2017 of just almost a point, 0.7%. And we have been seeing a nice trend here, 1% in 2014, 1% 2015, 3.1 in 2016. Oh, that was largely a multiplier impact. We did have some growth that year, and then just under a point this year. So we rate that as positive with caution. Again, we like to see the trend is going in the right direction. We wouldn't mind picking up a little more assessed value, but again, we are seeing a positive trend there. Airport ridership, to kind of jump into one that's clearly negative and has been for some time. You can see that we did have a drop-off again in 2017, almost 12.38%. And this has been kind of a sustained drop-off of the ridership. We work pretty closely with the Sierra folks, and we talked to them again this year to get a better sense of what's going on. They had indicated to us that they took a pretty big hit in terms of business travel this year during some pretty significant months where they typically see a lot of business travel from some more of their business transactional bases kind of dropping off. They did mention that they did see a bump in leisure travel, which was nice, but it wasn't enough to offset the loss in business travel during those months. And they have noted that they are seeing in 2018 through July about a 3% increase in ridership. So hopefully we'll see an uptick at this time next year. They seem to believe that's occurring, so we'll see where that goes. But we do have this as a negative trend simply because of what's been doing for the last few years. On the flip side, Amtrak usage is up for the first time since 2013 or so. And actually, this chart's kind of been where we thought it was going to be. We knew in those last few years we've seen drop-offs in the ridership. When we talked to the Amtrak folks and our own analysis, basically the high-speed rail implementation caused a great deal of disruption for service. That is now complete. And we actually, last year, I was expecting to see a bump up this year, and in fact, we are seeing it now because the tracks are essentially done, and the ridership is returning in terms of not disrupting the train travel. So we did put positive with caution simply because we had a trend dropping off. One bump doesn't necessarily make it all better, but we have reason to believe it's going to continue to be strong, and we know why it was down in those years. No, here's my animation. Unemployment, another good story here that continues to be good. It's been rated positive. We continue to see from the chart there a drop off for really the town and the state, and even the numbers there you can see for all of our comparables. Downstate cities all have seen a decrease in unemployment rate. So that's all positive, and we believe that will continue to be the case. A little bit kind of counterintuitive to that is this county workforce, which we have been for many years talking about the negative trend there. We did have a small bump in 2015, I guess you could probably call it really flat. Then we have dropped off 2 years in a row now, so we really are still continuing to classify that as negative. From the data we're able to obtain from the EDC and the state and companies in general, we have seen some increases in workforce for some of the larger companies, but still overall a drop in overall county workforce. So this again is something we're monitoring pretty closely with the partners we can, and I think it's nothing new to the council in terms of what we've been seeing in the workforce here in the county. This is just a chart that essentially shows the revenue mix. You can see the local sales tax is the highest, as well as property tax, and then state sales tax and income tax. Again, it just shows kind of a flavor for the diverse revenue mix that we have, and also gives you a sense of the reliance we have on sales tax, which is not untypical for a municipality. Okay, income tax. This one's going to be a little more time on it. We have this as negative. A lot going on here, and I know that you're aware of that in terms of the state. We did have a 4.1% drop in income tax year over year for the close of this 18 year, and that is entirely a result of the state. Let me back up a second. When we adopted the budget for 17-18, we put about a 2% increase in for income tax. That was our expectation. And then in July of that same year, the state passed their budget, from first time in a while, and had a 10% cut in our allocation, which was, a little surprise to us. We were told that's a one-year only thing. So we modified the the estimate at a 6.6% decrease from 2% plus to 6.6% negative. We did come in at 4.1%. So we did a little better than expected. I think if we hadn't had that 10% cut in those months that impacted last year, we'd have been up about 4.2% in income tax, which would have been nice. We did estimate for kind of looking forward for 18-19 that 10% cut would be restored and we'd be back to our full share. Although we didn't necessarily trust that was going to be the case during that time, so we kind of split the difference. Let's just take it to 5% growth versus kind of a 9 or 10% growth for this current year. As you know, the state passed their budget recently in July, and they moved it from 10% to 5%. And again, they've told us it's a one-year only thing, so we will see. Our conservative nature last year, and not necessarily, I use this word, not trusting the state to only make it a one-year change, is going to keep us fairly whole in this budget year. We're at 5% now. We'll probably see about 5% growth given the 5% cut from last year, or for the current year. That's a lot of numbers to kind of throw at you, but the bottom line there, I think will be, I would like to see it restored entirely, but we're kind of prepared for that 5% cut that actually did come. Yeah. Property tax rate distribution. This chart shows essentially the breakout of the rate as a percent of the total rate you pay as a community member in Normal. You can see the lion's share of property tax, as we all know, goes to Unit 5, almost 60%, 58.2. The town's at about 12% right now. Historically, that's a little higher than we typically have been. The last couple of years, we have kind of been, I guess, in effect, creeping up a bit. That is entirely the result of our commitment to funding pensions. As you know, we have multiple levies that we levy for: the fire and police pension, IMRF, retirement, Medicare, Social Security, and then a general pension or a general operation levy. The pension plans have been increasing over the last couple of years, as you're well aware. So that's kind of giving us a little more of a creep into that percentage. The other pensions have been, or the other retirement accounts have been relatively non-impactful to that increase. And then, of course, the operating levy we use has been flat for over a decade or so. So in terms of operationally, we're not increasing the levy or the rate, but we are having to have some upward pressure on the rate for the property tax for police and fire. And I'll be back here in a couple of months to share where we're going with that shortly. That being said, the town still remains, I guess you could call number one or the lowest, which is a nice place to be in terms of property tax among all the downstate cities that we can compare ourselves against. We're still in the lowest part of that rate. We try to do our best to pull in equivalent rates in terms of just getting back to the general fund operational levies, which for all these cities include a portion for pension funding. So that is nice to see that continue. In terms of the overall rate for the town, this is the entire community rate, which includes the Unit 5, the airport, the community college, the library, the county, and so forth. We're third place, I guess. We've always been kind of in that group of 3 or 4. Champaign actually was first last year, but they had a pretty big increase in terms of school districts, but they're still kind of that bottom 4 of folks in terms of where you want to be. Utility tax, this has been one that we've talked about quite often. It comprises telephone, cable TV, gas and electric, and we've been seeing it drop off for the last several years, since basically 2015 or 2013. We didn't see as much as a drop-off this year, which was nice. We have seen some pretty remarkable decreases over the last few years, just 2.6 this year. We are tracking this stuff every month, and right now we're actually a little bit up from year to date. It's still pretty early. We're also up, to get back to sales tax and income tax, we're actually up a little bit in those too over last year. So now those are early preliminary numbers, only a few months in our pocket right now, but at least the message there is we're not seeing anything too drastic right now in terms of year-over-year changes. Sales tax, this includes both state and local. The light blue bar is the local, the 2.5% rate, and then the darker blue is the 1% municipal share. This, a little story behind this one too. We have been, I guess you'd call it struggling over the last couple of years. 2016 was basically flat. We had a bit of a drop off in 2017, 3.2%. Like I said, this year we did end up a little bit. We were kind of planning for about a flat in both state and local. It came in about 1.4 for state, which was nice to see. That kind of occurred late in the year. We were looking flat for most of the budget season. We were preparing for the budget, but we did have a little bit of a bounce at the end of the year, which was nice. As you can see, local came in at 3.7%, which is a lot higher than we expected. There is a little bit of a factor there that impacted that, kind of a one-time infusion of money. Each year, the state gives what they characterize as an accelerated payment, and it's essentially a state law calculation that operates like this. They take the last 2 full fiscal years, figure out what your average was for both those years, and they give you the difference. It's a very interesting law. We've talked to them quite a bit about it. And we get a payment every year, but it's relatively minor. This year it was $372,000, which is a lot of money. And the reason it's a lot more this year is because we had a rate increase. So the rate increase that we enacted, the 1%, had a significant impact on that calculation. Typically, it's not very much money, but it did come in. We wanted to make sure we knew what that money was before we booked it as revenue, so we were being a bit conservative. We won't see that bump again, unless, of course, we won't see a bump again going forward. It'll be just kind of a minor bump here and there. But that did help offset some of that loss. Without it, we would have been about 1.2% up for local sales tax. Food and beverage, basically the same story as usual. It begins to be a very good revenue performer for us, up almost 7% this year over last year. We're running just a little bit above 1 or 2 right now, but again, we only have about 2 months of reporting going on. But again, looking fine. Total expense, again, this is just to give the reader of the chart, the reader of the information, a sense of the spending. Clearly, a large piece of it goes to public safety, which is police, fire, and inspections. Moving on to personnel costs, this also is basically a personnel cost as a percent of our overall expense. Again, personnel costs are a significant piece of government service and government expense. So controlling that is where you do have a lot of ability to control the budget. As you know, last year we had some significant eliminations of positions, and this chart essentially shows that happening. So we like to keep that trending at least flat or downward. If we're doing that, then we're managing technology, we're managing our labor costs, and keeping that in a good spot. So we have that marked as positive. And this is probably one of the bigger drops in this last year for fiscal 2018 because of the personnel, and we'll probably see that continue to kind of drop off a little bit too. Overlapping debt, there's quite a few charts in the trend report that describe debt, our debt as a portion of assessed value, and this overlapping debt idea. This is the only one I'm going to talk about, but they all kind of say the same story. We are seeing a slow drop of our overall outstanding debt, not only as the town, but as overlapping debt is everyone's debt. It's what Heartland's issued, what Unit 5 has issued, what the airport's issued, the county. So that is good to see that debt dropping off, because it essentially means people are paying their debt down and not issuing new debt. That could obviously change quickly depending on organizations' plans for issuing new debt, but we have seen for the last few years that drop off, which is nice to see. And then just as a side note, and we'll get to this maybe later a little bit too, the town is, again, continues to manage our debt very well. We've done multiple refundings over the years, and it's saved us millions of dollars. And I know that some of my colleagues in those areas have also done refundings again, which helps the debt picture a lot. So again, that's looking pretty good. General fund balance, this is one that's got some story behind it too, as usual. Again, we are seeing we had 2 years of kind of the fund balance dropping off a little bit, which we were aware of. We had a deficit in 2017 and we had a deficit in 2018. However, the deficit in 2018 wasn't as bad as it was expected to be. We had estimated about $3.3 million deficit for the budget process to end this fiscal year in. That's about an 8.9% overall drop in fund balance. We had about a 4.9, so we had it's just about $1.8 million drop off in fund balance. So we did better because one, sales tax came in a little better. We were thinking mostly flat, and it came about a point and a half up. We had the payment from the state for the accelerated payment for that extra dollars. State income tax came in at a deficit, but not quite as low as we expected. So all those things kind of helped beef up the fund balance. We did have some nice savings too that we typically don't count on, just to be conservative, but generally we did still have a deficit here, but not nearly as bad as we expected, which is going to help. Pension funding, some good news here, although I don't want to overly state where we're at with pension funding. We did have a slight increase in the pension funding plan for police, as well as fire. So we have, in a very slight way, reversed what has been a very long trend of kind of a slow decrease. A lot of that change in funding, that slight positive change in funding, was just the market this year was pretty strong. Now, you think, well, why wouldn't it be more than that? What happens is the actuary, when they determine what this level of funding is, they smooth gains and losses in the market. So we enjoyed a nice gain this year, but we only enjoyed it to the point how much the smoothing would allow us to enjoy it. Same on the back end. If we have a bad year, we take it down slowly too. So again, it's nice to see that. We're hopeful that it will continue. We're still not ready to say it's not a negative trend, only because it's something that we're always, us and every municipality is struggling with, and we're getting in front of it all the time, evidenced by the increases in the property tax levy that we've done over the last few years to commit funding to that. It's a long-term problem. It's a long-term solution. But again, we did see at least a slight increase that has somewhat slowed down over the last few years. IMRF, again, is also in good condition. That one's been kind of relatively flat in terms of going up or down. We had a big increase this last year, which is also a direct result of the market. IMRF does very well. They typically do better than the police or fire pension plans, only because they have a little more looser restrictions on what they can invest in. So they're obviously a little more riskier, but they have a good organization in place. They have probably 300 money managers looking over their firm's stuff, and they manage it very well. So everyone's doing pretty well in IMRF. We're actually above 90% for the first time in a long time. We did mark it as positive with caution, only because 1 year doesn't necessarily reverse a trend, but this is not an area we're very concerned about. It's well funded, it's well managed, and we're in 90s now, which is certainly where you want to be. Okay. Water fund, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here because the story is not because it's good. Positive all the way around. We're seeing a nice continued strength of that fund with what's been occurred in the past and what we have planned for the future in terms of managing that activity and the capital needs of it. Sewer fund is I'm going to spend a little time on, only because it's obviously been on our minds for the last couple of years. The council, as you're well aware, ordered and completed a significant master planning study of the infrastructure. You've seen that last year. That, coupled with finding funds to help support that infrastructure need, have been put in place, and we're already starting to see the benefit of that in terms of where the fund is at in terms of revenue and in terms of cash and investment. So this is definitely a success story in terms of council planning and sewer planning and rate analysis and rate implementation, and just kind of forethought in terms of where we're going with this fund to make sure it continues to have high quality service and is financially viable. Different story than what it's been the last few years, for sure. So again, this is kind of joining the water fund in a way in terms of a real healthy position to manage it successfully. Health and dental fund, this one probably has the most story behind it. Fair amount of things going on here, and I'll do my best to kind of explain it. You can see that we have had a couple years where we've drawn the fund balance down. I'll kind of start with 2018, 37% drop in fund balance. Before we go too far in this, the previous year, we had a 28% drop in fund balance. And probably the best way to describe this, and also this is where we're rolling out our first use of the new verbiage, negative but optimistic. And I'll explain what that means right now. I'll do my best. The health fund, we have a baseline expectation of what's going to happen with those claims based on the design, with the workforce, our history. But our workforce is relatively small when it comes to plans like this, so we are subject to some spikes, in activity. 2017 was one of those spikes where we have kind of an assumed baseline of what we feel is an appropriate level of claim expectation. That year we had some high utilization of what we consider specialty prescription drugs, which are very expensive, and that didn't happen again this year, but happened last year, so we saw a bit of drawdown in fund balance. Now, we mitigate these things by having a reserve fund balance, which we do, and a good one, and we have stop loss to control other possible expenses. So brings me to 2018. Same situation. We have this baseline expectation that's set with consultants in our review. 2018, we had a handful of claims that were very significant. In fact, the expenses from this year to last year we had more claim expense, but several claims pierced into our stop loss. So we recovered that money back, almost $500,000. So even though we had more claim expense, it pushed into our stop loss where we get reinsurance back, and then we're kind of off the hook at a certain point. So you can see that we can have a pretty big swing in fund balance and still absorb it. And in fact, this chart doesn't actually tell the whole story, because also in 2018, we're going to get into in just a moment, we had some plan changes. One of the plan changes that we did was to move or incentivize people going from Plan 1 and 2, which are traditional PPO plans, into Plan 3, which has been in existence for a little while now, to get folks into that plan, which is essentially a more cost-effective plan for the town. It's a high-deductible health plan, has an HSA health services account associated with it, to incentivize folks to move from the PPO plans, Plan 1 and 2, into Plan 3. The town contributed, as you're well aware, what we call it a seed or a contribution. That seed came from this fund. So if I were to correct this fund look by pulling that seed out and getting it just back to claims out the door, real medical claims, and money coming in to support those claims, and pull that seed out, which was kind of a one-time contribution to incentivize that activity, we actually didn't have that much of a drop-off. So you can see, well, it's 14%, but again, that was mostly, again, kind of something outside our expected baseline with those unusual spikes in terms of this handful of claim costs. That can happen whenever. We typically don't expect it to happen, but we're kind of prepared for it through that. So kind of to recap why we feel negative but with optimism, we did in fact have a decrease in fund balance. This is the second year. However, a large piece of that was a plan decrease to help seed people to go into Plan 3, which would ultimately benefit us in the future because we have less claim costs associated with those plans. That was only that changed in January of 2018. We also implemented Benestar Insurance Program, which essentially moved all the post-65 retirees off of our plan into a private market plan. We had the incentivization to go from 1 and 2 into 3, and both those had kind of impacted us the last 3 months of the fiscal year. So we still saw a drop in fund balance because of high claim costs and our contribution to incentivize plan people to go to Plan 3, but we just saw about 3 months of that, really 2 months of that benefit. So we have expectations that we're going to see a drop in claim costs because of these things that we've done in terms of positioning the plan design to help us in the future. So we have actually looked at that a little bit. We looked at cost, are they up or down? So we looked at the same period from February, so we kind of got past January, and they have a little bit of lag. So the expenses from February to August of last year compared to the same time period in the previous year, have we seen up or down in terms of claim activity? Have these plan modifications worked? And what we're seeing now is the answer is yes. We've got a 10.2% drop in claim cost alone from that period. And we still have a bit of a tail or a lag that we're still paying costs from the post-65s that weren't quite in Benestar or they were in January, but they still had expenses coming through the system at that point in time. So we expect to see a continued favorable claim expense in this current fiscal year and out years, and so that should show an increase in fund balance going forward. We've already seen a nice decrease in claim costs just in those 7 months. So we expect that to continue. Now, again, we're talking about a new baseline that we're expecting. We need to be prepared to deal with anything that is the spikes that come along with the nature of our plan and the size of our workforce. But we have that covered through reserve and stop loss, and these plan changes have kind of positioned ourselves or the town for where we feel is going to be better claim experience, and we're already seeing that right now. That's kind of a long story. I probably would request Pam to make explain anything I might have missed up there, but because she has a deep knowledge of this information too. And
The only thing I would add, just to maybe supplement Andrew's comments, are that a couple of things. We did have, when we made those plan design changes in January, effective January, we had much greater migration of employees from the expensive plan into the high deductible health plan, which of course caused a greater seed requirement. But we also knew and planned all along that the seed would pay off over a period of time in reduced claim costs. And so that's good news, that many more people than projected chose the high deductible health plan. The other thing to keep in mind is that effective January 1, 2020, the most expensive plan we have will no longer exist. So that does save the town in terms of premium costs and such. So despite all this data and detail, or in addition, I should say, to all this data and detail of the health fund, we still, I believe, have a great story to tell, because your prior council meeting 2 weeks ago,
Right.
we adopted the plan for fiscal year 18-19 for the plan year, the benefits that actually go into effect in January 1st, with a 2% increase in premiums. That was with the consultation of our, the Horton Group, our advisor, and we're very, very confident that that is what the plan needs for next fiscal year. That is much lower than national trends for healthcare. In fact, we budgeted for 8%, but we think 2% is adequate. So, this look back is kind of it could, if you looked at that only, it could be a little bit disconcerting. But when we look forward and we know why the plan went down, or our fund balance went down in the health fund, I think it's a very good story.
Yes. Our next section of the report is our fiscal strategies or our financial strategies. These are ones that you guys have been practicing for many, many years. We'll do a quick review of those. We did add last year water and water reserve levels and sewer reserve levels, and we'll review those too. But again, you kind of know where we're going with that in terms of the story. The first we look at, of course, is general fund reserve levels. We have that positive outlook with caution, simply because we try to shoot for a 15% reserve. We're at like 14.5 right now, so really just barely below it, and that's off of a pretty rough budget year. So I think with caution simply is, we're getting into the budget process now. We haven't got any major concerns yet, so we're looking for kind of a status quo budget this year. But we're always kind of cautious about where we stand. But I think for now we're feeling, for lack of a better word, okay about where we're going with that. Vehicle and equipment reserve, again, positive outlook. We did lower that. We used to have it at 110% of 5 years of spending. Now we put it at 75%. That was part of our budget cuts last year in terms of kind of loosening that restriction up to make more money available for general fund and to deal the best we can in terms of managing those personnel cuts and program cuts and so forth. And that did help. We are currently above that right now, and I predict we'll probably will be for the budget cycle this year for the 5 years. Contingency funds, this was where these all got cut last year as part of the budget. This is the money we kind of set aside in a non-departmental Department of General Fund, and it just serves as a place to solve a problem or to take on an opportunity. And we've done that many, many times where we might have something we can do that would be unique and we have funds available for it, or we're just solving a problem that was unexpected through that. Now, we have nothing in the budget for those right now. For the next 5 years, we hope to put some of that back this year. It's not that we haven't got extra money. We would just go into fund balance reserve if we have a contingency issue, but we usually budget a small piece, about 1% of expenditures every year, which we had to pull as part of the budget process last year, again, to soften some of the harder cuts that we had to make. Debt service, debt management, these are a positive outlook. Typically, it's always positive. We watch this extremely closely, and we're very sensitive to our debt program. I won't belabor where we're at with that because you're well aware of the benchmarks and what we do, but at this point in time, this is a solid position and as solid as it always has been, and I don't see that changing in the near future or in the future at all. Health insurance reserve, we just had quite a long discussion about that. We have done a couple of things here. We did mark it as positive outlook with caution because we feel very comfortable where we're going based on the changes we made back in January and what we're already seeing in terms of claim activity and what we're talking about with our consultants and the renewal. A lot of discussions going on with this at a lot of different levels, and so we're feeling pretty positive about it going forward. We did, over the last couple of years, we've talked about the conservative nature of our reserve planning in this fund. We always use the 4 highest expense months from the last fiscal year close. And everyone that we've talked to, even Horton, our consultants, like that's pretty high. That's pretty conservative. And we tend to agree now, mostly because we feel like getting to that level is probably maintaining too much capital in the fund. Even 3 highest months is probably still conservative, at least I feel it is, and I think our consultants would too. Again, we have stop loss, we have a fund balance there. We're shooting for the 3 highest months. We're below that right now, but again, we feel we're going to be getting to there in the next few years, so we're comfortable. Water operating reserve is in good shape. It's at 20% level. We do drop off a little bit in year 5. We're going to go through the budget process this year and remodify that. But that's why I got positive outlook with caution. But generally speaking, the fund's in great shape. The reserve capital needs is very positive. We kind of keep a capital reserve in their capital fund of 1.5. We're above that now, and we expect to be above that in the future. Sewer, positive on both counts. We're not at 25% yet in terms of operating reserve for fund balance, but we are there by year 5. So we feel, and it's moving in the right direction. The trajectory seems to be working correctly, and also we do have enough money in capital reserve to our $500,000 amount. So that fund is healthy now and will continue to grow healthy in the future. And while it's doing that, it's going to be addressing a lot of its capital needs that are going to be identified from the plan. So that's again a success story. Just a quick summary here. These are just kind of thoughts from all of us. The community indicators. We have some mild concerns there with the construction permits are down, airport ridership are down. Unemployment's in great shape, so there's kind of some conflicting things, county workforce, but for the most part, just some mild concerns. Revenue, some modest concerns again there with the state continuing to cut our income tax. Utility tax kind of flowing down, but income tax or sales tax looking pretty good now. So we'll watch that very closely. Expense and debt service, no issues really worried about there. Fund balance, you've kind of seen the story there. You can kind of draw your own conclusions, but again, we're always going to be kind of concerned where we're at, but really we're in a pretty strong financial position in terms of all the fund balances. Just because Andrew's concerned doesn't mean it's something to really be concerned about, but we watch it pretty closely. And then our financial strategies, again, some modest concerns. Again, I know I kind of make this a little more negative than I really need to be, but it keeps things, it keeps me happy, I guess, I don't know. Keeps me awake at night. But again, I don't want to leave you with this idea that we're in trouble. We're not. We have a very strong position going into the budget year. We had to get through some pretty difficult times, which we managed through our budget process and through the council reacting to things. We ended the year with a deficit, but we knew it was going to be a deficit. We dealt with that as part of the budget process, and it came better than expected, which is nice to see. Our projections for the current year, 18-19, are holding or are positive compared to what I was expecting, which is good. We always have challenges for the 19-20 budget. Again, utility tax, some of the flat revenues we'll have to deal with. the state continuing to cut our income tax. That's supposedly going to go away next year, but what decided we felt as a budget committee. We still are being charged for our local collection of state sales of our local sales tax from the state. They did cut that 0.5%. It was 2% surcharge. Now it's 1.5, which I guess we could say thank you for that. We have a lack of contingency funds. We need to kind of deal with that. I wouldn't mind having some money there, but again, it's not dire. But again, I just like to have money in as many places as we can to be able to satisfy any kind of needs or opportunities. And then the pension funding levels are going to be a problem for a long time. They're a problem for everybody. This council's got in front of it with policy, and we've not hidden or tried to run away from levy increases, and I know you know that better than most. And we'll be back again to talk about that shortly. But those are all areas that you're well familiar with. And again, I don't want to leave you the impression that it's bad, because things are not bad. They're I would say our characterize our position as is strong. I would like to have it a little stronger because it makes me feel good. But we're in a good position because of the council and the policies and last year's budget process and where we're going forward. So that's kind of it. I'd take any questions or comments.
With that, though, if I could just add a couple more comments. First of all, thank you to Andrew and Sue and the finance staff for putting this together. It's an incredible exercise that finance goes through every year to put this together, but it is very useful for us as we plan, and we're getting into the budget preparation process for next fiscal year. So this is very useful for staff as well, as council is showing you the picture of where we're at. Given the fact that today property taxes were due, it's probably timely that we did talk a little bit about pension funding. That seems to be an important topic of discussion. And so I just wanted to add a couple of comments to Andrew's screenshots that he showed, that just to be clear, just take a moment to talk a little bit about our pension funding. It was rated as negative because our funding levels of 56 in the police pension fund and 60% or so in the fire pension fund is not where we would like them to be. But our pension funding formula is based on actuarial analysis. So this isn't numbers that the town staff comes up with. These are actuaries that put together their details on the firefighters, the retired firefighters, and pension funding that we need to have down the road, years from now, and how much we should set aside each year. And the formula, in addition, is calculated by investment income. So every year that we can do well in terms of our investments and our return on investments, that helps that funding formula. And it's not, as Andrew said, based on a year-by-year basis of how much we earned each year. It's a 30-year projection of how that investment income looks. So we're making, in terms of the data that Andrew shared with you, that we made some slight improvements in terms of that funding level, but still it's a work in progress. So I just wanted to share that.
Questions or comments for Andrew? Thank you, Andrew. It's always a fascinating report, and really it helps us to tell the story of the town. You and your staff have done a great job on this.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you
Thanks.
very much.
Next item of business is a motion to approve appointments to the Children's Discovery Museum Foundation Board.
So moved. Second.
As this is a matter of personnel, there will be no discussion unless a council member would like to take this to an executive session. And seeing no such request, please call the roll.
Mrs. Lorenz.
Aye.
Mr. Preston.
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy.
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen.
Aye.
Mr. McBride.
Aye.
Mayor Kus.
Aye. The appointments are approved, and Mr. Fritzen, if you would tell us who they are.
Sure. First of all, thanks to past board members Sally Tucker and Kelly Harbert, who had terms that expired. And they're going to be replaced by Teresa Prosser. Teresa is the Director of Medical Surgical Services at Advocate Bromen and adjunct faculty member at Illinois State University's Mennonite College of Nursing. Volunteers for numerous community events and supports a variety of organizations, including Special Olympics, Relay for Life, Heart Walk, Community Health Care Clinic, and United Way. She and her husband reside in Bloomington with their 3 children. Also named to the foundation board is Mitchell Stiebel. Mitch serves as a vice president of commercial banking for Busey Bank, president of the Home Sweet Home Mission Board of Directors, past president of Bloomington Normal Young Professionals, He's also a member of Sunrise Rotary, serves as a coach for youth baseball, basketball, football, and volunteers for church youth ministry, and is interested in volunteering with organizations that focus on community and children as well as leadership development. Both their terms will expire June 30th, 2020.
Great, thank you. Before taking a motion for adjournment, are there comments or concerns?
The only thing I'll add is this Thursday is the Light the Night, so the bike light giveaway. And thank you to Connect Transit and Bike Blono for sharing with us in the cost of that program. I think Bike Blono and Connect Transit are picking up 2/3 of that cost, so it is a true partnership. And so it will be a busy place in Uptown on Thursday evening because a lot of people come to get their lights, so that's pretty neat.
Motion for adjournment.
So moved. Second.
Please call the roll.
Mrs. Lorenz,
Aye.
Mr. Preston,
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy,
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen,
Aye.
Mr. McBride,
Aye.
Mayor Kus.
Aye, we are adjourned. Thank you.